Danielle Schoening had always been fascinated by the supernatural. As the owner of a bed and breakfast home, she often found herself working late into the night, taking care of her guests and ensuring that everything was in order for the next day. Despite the late hours, Danielle always found the quiet and stillness of the night to be comforting. That was, until one particular night when she heard a noise that sent shivers down her spine. It was a dog howling in the distance, but it sounded closer than it should have been. Danielle tried to ignore it and focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she sat at her desk, Danielle heard a woman whispering in a man's ear, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Feeling increasingly unnerved, Danielle decided to take a break and explore the rest of the house. As she walked through the darkened corridors, she noticed a woman in old Victorian clothing standing at the top of the staircase. The woman was staring down at Danielle with a cold, dead expression. Danielle tried to call out to her, but the woman disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Shaken by the encounter, Danielle hurried back to her office. But as she sat down at her desk, she noticed a shadow moving across the room. It was shaped like a person, but it was too dark to make out any details. Danielle was frozen with fear as she watched the shadow walk up and down the stairs, as if searching for something. Suddenly, the chair in the room began to move by itself. Danielle watched in horror as it slowly rolled across the floor, seemingly guided by an invisible force. She tried to get up and run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, unable to escape the terrifying presence in the room. Then, there was a knock on the door. It was a slow, deliberate knocking that seemed to echo through the house. Danielle knew that she should be afraid, but for some reason, she felt compelled to answer the door. Slowly, she made her way across the room, her heart pounding in her chest. When she opened the door, there was no one there. But as she stepped out onto the porch, Danielle felt a cold breeze blowing through the trees. It was as if the very air was alive with a presence that she could not see or touch. As she stood there, Danielle heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path leading up to the house. They were slow, measured footsteps, as if someone was walking with purpose. Suddenly, Danielle saw the woman in the old Victorian clothing again, standing at the end of the path. Without a word, the woman began to walk towards Danielle. Her eyes were empty and lifeless, and her skin was pale and cold to the touch. Danielle tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen with fear as the woman approached her, her lips moving as if she was speaking, but no sound coming out. Just when Danielle thought it was all over, the woman suddenly disappeared. Danielle was alone once again, standing in the cold night air, her heart racing with fear and excitement. After the incident with the woman in Victorian clothing, Danielle began to feel uneasy in her own home. She heard strange noises in the night, and her dog would howl at seemingly nothing. One night, as she was working late, she heard a whisper in her ear. It was a woman's voice, and it seemed to be coming from right behind her. When Danielle turned around, there was no one there. As time passed, the strange occurrences in the house only grew more frequent and intense. Danielle would hear footsteps walking up and down the stairs, even when no one was there. Her furniture would move on its own, and objects would fall off of shelves without explanation. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. One night, as Danielle was lying in bed, she heard a knocking at her bedroom door. She assumed it was one of her guests, but when she got up to answer it, there was no one there. Suddenly, she heard a woman's voice whispering in her ear. It was the same voice she had heard before, but this time it was different. There was a sense of urgency and desperation in the voice. The voice told Danielle that she needed to leave the house, that it was not safe for her there. Danielle was terrified, but she didn't know where to go. She had put all of her savings into the bed and breakfast home, and she couldn't just abandon it. But the voice continued to whisper in her ear, growing more and more insistent. As Danielle lay there, paralyzed with fear, she saw a figure walking up and down the hallway outside her door. It was the woman in the Victorian clothing, and she seemed to be looking for something. Suddenly, the woman turned and looked directly at Danielle. Her eyes were empty and soulless, and Danielle knew in that moment that she was not dealing with a mere ghost. In a panic, Danielle grabbed her dog and ran out of the house. She didn't stop until she was miles away, in a small motel on the edge of town. But even there, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. The next morning, Danielle went back to her bed and breakfast home to gather her things. But when she arrived, the house was completely empty. All of the furniture, all of the decorations, everything was gone. It was as if the house had never been lived in. Danielle never spoke of the incident again, but she was never quite the same after that night. She moved to a new town and started over, but she could never shake the feeling that something was following her, something that she couldn't see or understand. And she knew that she could never go back to that haunted house, not after what she had seen and experienced